Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is Hotcast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Go Iowa Awesome and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby, publisher of the site, as well as managing editor Ross Binder here on this Tuesday morning. It's been a long week and it's Tuesday. How's that? Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe wherever you are listening, whether that be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. And of course, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment, and let us know what you're thinking about the state of Iowa women's basketball after they fall to South Carolina in the NCAA championship, 87-75. They had their chances, but they do fall to the Gamecocks. One of the best teams that we've probably seen, at least this decade, put together by Don Staley. So Adam Jacoby, our beat writer for the women, he was there. Adam, your initial thoughts on the game and where things are now?
Yeah, it was a great game. It was exciting. It was almost 40 minutes of really intense competition. And boy, I tell you, South Carolina is a great team, top to bottom. The depth is incredible. Their size is incredible. Their athleticism, they're well coached. You know, Iowa had a magical run, earned their way all the way to this point. But sometimes, especially when a team that's that deep and that talented is playing that well, there's not a whole lot you can do. So the nice thing that Iowa players can say is that they can hold their heads up high. They played their basketball. They didn't get taken out by some rando scoring, hitting 5 3-pointers out of nowhere. This was a quality basketball game played by both teams. Iowa left it all out on the court. They came up just short. I really wish I could have covered a national championship, guys. I really wanted that experience for myself, and I wanted it for Iowa fans. It wasn't meant to be that day, and I think if these two teams played, South Carolina probably wins about 8 out of 10, and Iowa just needed one of those 2 out of 10 to happen, and it wasn't that day. But Coach Bluder said in the locker room afterwards, "Hold your heads up high." Right? They all know they gave it their best shot. They competed their hardest. And the one nice thing about that is the rest of the nation, those 18 million viewers, 18 plus, peaked at 24 million. They watched basketball the way it was meant to be played. They watched the highest level of basketball that the sport could have offered that day. And at that point, you just congratulate the victors. You say South Carolina, you earned that the whole way through, wire to wire, the best team in college basketball. And it's great that Iowa got to share that stage, got to show the rest of the nation that they belonged on that stage. And who knows, the next time they played, Iowa might have taken the next one.
Right. So when we talk about that South Carolina team, I think we have to talk about them first almost because that is just a buzzsaw of a team. They just what they ran into. I mean, they played 9 deep. Nine players played in double-digit minutes in that game on Sunday night, and 6 played double-digit minutes for Iowa, the sixth being Addison O'Grady. Kylie Feuerbach, excuse me, only played 5 minutes. Of course, Molly being hurt and only getting 22 seconds, which, God, you'd like to think things would have been at least slightly different had Molly been available through this tournament run, right? Like, who knows? You can only speculate so much, but first of all, glad that you got to get some minutes, right? Or 20 seconds, right? That you got to see the floor in the championship game. Um, as far as South Carolina goes, I mean, Camila Cardoso is going to be in the WNBA. Pow Pow was exactly what South Carolina needed. We heard it during the broadcast. Is she looked at this team? I think she was at Oregon last year. She looked at
Mm-hmm.
this team at South Carolina and said, "I could help them," and that's exactly what she did. She came in and she shot lights out for them. Um, Raven Johnson was 1 of 11 from the field, but she was all over Caitlin Clark the whole game. Gave Caitlin hell. Tessa Johnson had the game of her life in the national championship game, 19 points, game of the year at least for a freshman. 19 points, and she was 3 of 6 from deep. I mean, I've just looked at this team, and I'm more so looking back on it now. But you look at this team, and it's like all 9 of their players that saw the floor could help Iowa, right? The way things are constructed. I mean, the 2 freshmen, especially, Full Wiley is a hooper. Tessa Johnson, like I said, was awesome in this game. And then, of course, all the starters, Fagan and Watkins. Chloe Kitts was fantastic. That type of length. That's a player that Iowa could use. Like, again, you just go up and down the roster, and it's just loaded. And that speaks to Dawn Staley and her ability to communicate to her players what they need from each of these players. And that, you're not going to be Caitlin Clark at South Carolina. You're going to be part of a deep team that's going to spread the wealth. So
There's a little bit of a dynamic that I think might even help Iowa in terms of the model that Dawn Staley has built at South Carolina. And one of the big things that Staley has done, I mean, we're talking about a team that just lost 5 players to the WNBA draft just last year. Imagine if Eliot Boston decided to take another year to come back. Like, that team not only would have gone undefeated, not only would have won the national championship, but would have probably been kicked out of the NCAA for being like too good. So, but a big thing about that is Staley is recruiting 4 stars and 5 stars to play reserve roles right away. It is not a matter of, well, we have piece A, we don't need piece B. It is a get the talent in there, get the talent in there. And I've heard a lot of Iowa fans especially say, well, that makes her job easier. No, it doesn't. That one, I can tell you that Lisa Bluder would have rather had 6-year players like Kate Martin or a super senior like Gabby Marshall than a freshman, whether it's a 4-star, a 5-star, or whatever, because Iowa's style of ball depended on these players knowing what each other were going to do, that sort of ESP that comes with all that experience together. However, when it comes to putting the most talented roster together, you don't think about who's going to be in that 5. You don't even think about who's going to be in that 8. You're thinking about 1 through 12, because in games like, I don't know, the national championship, you can't only depend on your top 5 having their best game at any one time. And so South Carolina starters were not the best 5 against Iowa. What made them so dangerous was Dawn Staley could look at her bench and say, all right, Full Wiley, get in there. All right, Tessa Johnson, go in there. Raven Johnson, all right. And they were able to find those lineups that were the most dangerous against Iowa. Chloe Kitts, yeah, she had a double-double in under 20 minutes, but her first few minutes, she was lost on defense. So they could throw her on the bench, figure it out with some of the other players, and get her back into a role that worked for her. And Iowa really did not have that luxury with its depth situation, especially with Molly Davis out, really limiting the options that they had on that perimeter. And Raven Johnson, my goodness, the defense she played on Caitlin Clark really changed the tone of that entire game. You throw in Pow Pow, Eliot, like you said, hitting those 3-pointers off the bench. And it was not quite Jasmine Carson and LSU, but it was South Carolina can do this. And so the good news for Iowa is now that this staff is really ramping up their recruiting nationally, they have that proof of concept to say, yeah, we're recruiting scorers and we're going to recruit more than one. We are going to recruit more than one player who can fill that superstar role. And you look at their top targets coming in the 25 and 26 classes, and we can talk about those in a little bit. That is how you build a roster, not only for that top spot, not only for that 1 through 5, not even only for that 1 through 8, but 1 through 12, those women who can compete on a national level against the best of the best. If you want to win a national championship in this era of women's college basketball, you've got to recruit a ton of talent. They know that, they're working on it, and Iowa's coming. This is not a flash in the pan. This is not a fluke. This is not ending with Caitlin Clark graduating. Next year is going to be a bit of a dip, but Iowa is not done.
Ross, I saw you unmute your mic when I was talking. Did you have something you wanted to add? We were talking about South Carolina there.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of echo what Adam said, and they just didn't have, and what you said too, they just didn't have any weaknesses. I mean, they had size, they could shoot, they had speed, they had length, they had anything you would possibly want on a basketball team. That roster possessed it, and probably had a backup and for it at least. So there was just very few or really no weaknesses on that team, which was, last year's South Carolina team was exceptional. They went into the Final Four undefeated, had Aaliyah Boston, but they were not a particularly strong outside shooting team, and they had a very poor game against Iowa, which Iowa was able to exploit and get that win. They did not have that weakness this year, and they shot well from outside. You mentioned Pow Pow making three. Tessa Johnson made threes also. And if you got a team that can hit from outside and they're gonna, control the inside because of all that size and length they had, they were, just absolutely destroyed Iowa on the glass. The rebounding was just, not even a fair fight. It was Mike Tyson versus Glass Joe, basically, and Iowa was Glass Joe. And so yeah, they can kill you inside, they can kill you outside. It's like there's not a lot you can do against that. Iowa needed them to probably be a little bit off, and Iowa needed to play an almost perfect game, or at least shoot the lights out from outside. I mean, they had to just have their, Marshall, Martin, Clark, Feuerbach, they all needed to be hitting threes, and unfortunately, that was not quite the case on Sunday.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about Cardoso. I mean, there's really not a whole lot you can do about 6'7", especially with her level of talent, especially with her touch around the rim. You know what it reminded me of, and it really didn't click until last night in the minutes of the men's college championship that I could find a little bit of time on the plane to watch. But South Carolina reminded me of if UConn had Zach Edey in the middle instead of the Klingon guy who is, great in his own right. But that is the level of problem that Iowa was facing, because there was not anybody on that roster who could handle a 6'7" center who had some level of talent, and Cardoso has that, and that level of tenacity, that level of competitiveness. You know, not only is Cardoso 6'7", not only is she big, not only is she skilled, but she's tenacious. She's a fighter. She's a competitor. There's a great shot that we got from Maddie Collins, who had traveled 6 hours out of Maryland just to shoot the game for us. So shout out to her. Shout out to Hoya Report for hooking that up. But there was a scrum in the middle, and Gabby Marshall, who's one of the most tenacious defenders and ball hawks, she is down there on the ground, like scrapping for a ball with Cardoso. Like that's how hard these teams are going after it. And there's only so much scrapping you can do when someone's close to a foot taller than you. Even in the middle, Hannah Stuelke, who was a hero playing the five undersized all year, and for the pace that Iowa wanted to play, you almost had to put her at the five. But she's going up against Cardoso, who is 5 inches taller and probably 50 pounds heavier. And there were so many instances under the rim where Hannah's basically fighting for her life. And listen, she left it all out on the floor too. But in terms of Iowa putting their players in the best position to win, in terms of everybody having a role where they're best suited to their strengths, that wasn't quite this team this year, especially with Hannah having to play the five, because there weren't really a whole lot of options in the middle who could go up against a player like that. Silky, at the very least, had the athleticism edge, could at the very least try to beat her to the rim. And Iowa did generate a few nice looking cuts and layups, but by and large, you could sort of tell what the game was going to be like when they subbed in Addison O'Grady, who is that taller, like truer five, that defensive presence, and she couldn't do anything. She was that task was also too tall for her. And so when your defensive replacement is not really able to play defense and can't keep from fouling to stop anybody, you kind of know the score at that point. And so there's a lot of growth that needs to happen for the Iowa players that are coming back if they're going to be part of another deep tournament run. And this sort of laid it clear, but it also laid clear, again, that you can recruit lots of talent to a team. You can sell that national championship as a like, yep, and we're getting everybody on board to do it. And people are going to play reduced roles. People are going to come off the bench that don't want to come off the bench. And Iowa already has some familiarity with that dynamic. Lisa Bluder knows how to recruit around that dynamic, but it's time to apply it to 4 stars, to 5 stars, to the headline recruits. And I think they know that they want to do that. They know how to do that. And it's going to start coming soon, but it'll be a little bit because that's kind of how recruiting works.
So we're talking about the rebounding discrepancy quite a bit. I to lay it out. South Carolina 51 rebounds, Iowa 29 rebounds. 7 offensive rebounds for Iowa, 18 for South Carolina. You could kind of see the writing on the wall early on in the game in that regard, like you were saying, Adam, with the difficulty of Addie O'Grady coming in and playing 13 minutes, but she's only 6'3", matching up with Camila Cardoso, who's 6'7". So I think what we need to do now that we've more or less wrapped up talking about the game here, I think we need to, with future in mind, which we'll talk a little bit about the future here for Iowa women's basketball. I think we just need to recognize just how phenomenal this team was the last 2 years, the last 4 years, really. They had some really good teams. And what they were able to do with not 4 and 5 stars, what they were able to do with Caitlin Clark, what she was able to do for the game. I can tell you, I'm assuming you guys saw that Instagram reel of Caitlin walking off the court and the caption was "Change the Game," and it was that song from the Barbie movie. Made my girlfriend cry. I'm sure it made a lot of other people cry too. And it was tough to see it end that way with such high highs for this team, with such high highs for Caitlin Clark, who did so many different things, and in my opinion is the GOAT. And that could be a conversation for another day. But what they did, how they managed it, I'm just I couldn't be more impressed with how things went. And Adam, you were right there the whole season.
Yeah, impressed is, I think, the right takeaway from that, because they were not only from a basketball standpoint impressive, but I got to talk to them every chance that we got, and Iowa did a great job of making not only Caitlin Clark available and not only Cade Martin and the seniors, but up and down the rotation. We got to talk to most, if not the entire team at some point over the course of the year. And even in the open locker rooms after the loss, these women were very emotional, as any team who loses a championship game is. But they conducted themselves with sparkling character all the way through. There was not one player on this roster. There was not one coach on this roster. There was no embarrassing statement. There was nothing that Iowa fans would have ever had to, proverbially plug their nose at or look the other way for. This was a basketball team through and through. These were great teammates through and through. They're well coached. It's a culture that every program should seek to emulate. And a big part of that was Bluder understanding that every player on that roster, 1 through 12, or it might even be 13. Yeah. Everybody plays a role. And even if it's Jada Jimfy being the chief vibes officer, right? Even if it's Ava Jones still being part of that program and providing that emotional support and providing something for the players to rally around. even if it's Molly Davis after she's injured, just being a part of that team, being on that bench, and even getting her minutes. Even when Sharon Goodman sort of slid back down that rotation when her athletic limitations became a little bit more apparent against the bigs of the Big Ten, which, I mean, is the toughest conference to play in. Shout out to South Carolina and the SEC, but up and down, the Big Ten is so difficult to play in, and you have to be so athletic to play in it. But even then, she was still a prominent part of this team. Her importance did not diminish with her minutes, and that creates a team, that creates lifelong bonds. That circle never changed just because the minutes were changing. And for as much of a transfer portal heavy sport as this is becoming, and let's be clear, Iowa certainly needs a point guard in that transfer portal going into next season, and we can talk about that in a little bit too. They're not above Molly Davis was a transfer portal player, so we're not dissing the portal here. Teams have to fill needs, but the way that they prioritized retention, the way that they prioritized familiarity and building those bonds as teammates, that filters through on the court. And once those are 4 stars and 5 stars who are all the way bought in, who are playing Iowa's system, who are in tune with each other, and then are also capable of going out there and competing with the South Carolinas, with the UConns on a game in, game out basis. I think that's the visions. Jan Jensen, when I talked to her after the game, she was her wires were pretty frayed, and she still gave some pretty great answers about what they're trying to build, and the trying to bring that culture to the next few classes. They know, and so the one other thing that I'll point out is South Carolina's a good instance of that model too. Don Staley's a great coach and has a great culture. I'll be honest with you guys, I was not really impressed when Iowa fans tried to get blocked by her en masse during the season, because ultimately, like, Don Staley's a hooper too, and I didn't think it was all that fair when she was like, yeah, that should have been like not a shooting foul. But I think in the rush to find a villain, we'll put it that way, an enemy, I think people kind of easily miss the fact that Dawn Staley and Lisa Bluder are much more alike than they are different. And even after the game, Staley talked about the importance of having respect for your opponent. And respecting your opponent means giving them the toughest game possible, competing your hardest, right? They respected Iowa by giving Iowa 40 minutes of hell on that court, and they won a national championship. They went undefeated for it, but they still made sure to shake their hands. They stopped their celebration to go through that handshake line. When Dawn Staley was up there, she not only gave, everybody gives that cursory congratulations to the team that just lost. Every coach does that. I'm guessing even Kim Mulkey did that when LSU won last year, and everybody has their harsh opinions about Mulkey. But for Staley to go that next step and personally shout out Caitlin Clark for changing the game, for lifting the sport up, and for predicting that she's going to lift the WNBA up. And Dawn Staley has a very close connection with the WNBA too. That tells me, and should tell all Iowa fans, that Dawn Staley gets it. She gets what's important about basketball. It's the winning, of course, but it's also winning the right way, winning with great respect for the sport, for your opponent. And when you do it like that, you've got nothing to regret. When you do it like that, you can look those other players in the eye, shake their hands, be happy, and you've got nothing more to worry about. So I'm very glad that Dawn Staley is there at South Carolina and is providing this model for other coaches, other programs, because the year of the tyrant, or the era of the tyrant at the top, which Lisa Bluder has never been, but there are a few in coaches at any sport, men's and women's basketball in particular. That era is kind of done because you don't need to coach like that. And as fans, I think it's a lot easier to cheer for coaches who put together the right kind of culture. And the fact that 18 million people nationwide got to watch two programs with sparkling clean cultures, with coaches who know the game, who can put together a great product on the court, and who have the wins to show for it, the highlights to show for it. Guys, that was college basketball at its best. That was exactly what you want a record-breaking audience to see. That is how you keep these fans around for years and years to come.
So I want to read out that quote. I tweeted it out by Don Staley, and a lot of people did too. But I just want to read that quote out that you referenced, Adam, just so people have full idea, because I thought it was great. I mean, you mentioned coaches do tend to give that respect, but Staley, I think she really put it well in that. I want to personally thank Caitlin Clark for lifting up our sport. She carried a heavy load. It's not going to stop here. When she's the number one pick in the WNBA draft, she's going to lift that league up as well. In hearing that, you had to know that was going to be all over Twitter, right? I mean, I thought that like I said, she did put it really well, and it was shown that she genuinely did have a ton of respect for Staley, or excuse me, for Caitlin Clark in Iowa. I saw somebody tweet something like, "Man, Don Staley is so cool. This is much easier than losing to Kim Mulkey," or something like that, which is accurate. Now, the other thing I wanted to address was you said those 18.7 million people on average watching that game. I think I saw somebody on Twitter put up that the Iowa versus Ohio State game in early 2022 set a Big Ten network record of 164,000 people watching. And here we are.
Yeah.
2 years later.
Yeah, that is literally less than 1% of the audience that they got. So when we talk about Caitlin Clark being a transformative figure in women's college basketball, and some Las Vegas Aces fans didn't like me saying that when the Aces moved their fever game to a bigger arena. But when we talk about being a transformative figure, that's what we mean. She brings eyeballs and she rewards that attention. And there aren't a whole lot of players, again, men's, women's, this or that. I'm trying to think about the last college basketball player that so consistently rewarded the attention that they brought on themselves, that so consistently had great games. And guys, I'm not sure I can think of anybody, because Michael Jordan was not scoring 30 a night at UNC. And part of that's on Dean Smith running that four-corner offense with, the most generational offensive player of all time. But genuinely, guys, who could you point to who was a guaranteed 35-5 or better, and usually better, when the lights were the brightest? I can't think of anybody. Ross, is anybody coming to mind, either men's or women's ball at all?
At the college level? No, I don't think so. I mean, she is a one of one at this level. She's done things we have never seen before, and you can't say you'll never see him again, but I don't think you'll see him anytime soon. That's for sure. Because she was just wholly unique, and you mentioned it, her ability to deliver on that big stage in that big moment, again and again and again and again, was what really separated her. Adam, you're going to add something.
I'm actually remembering a conversation that Braden, who was at the Final Four with me, and we were having in the hotel room afterwards. And if there is a corollary for Caitlin Clark in men's ball, especially for this season of Caitlin Clark, it might be Larry Bird, because we're talking about, Bird took Indiana State, Terre Haute, to the Final Four, all the way to the championship game, and was a revelation, and was playing ball in a way that people did not really play ball. And then they went up against Magic and Michigan State, and there's not really a whole lot that the Sycamores could have done from there. But what did Larry do, right? His legend, started at Indiana State, but it really grew when it got to the pros. And that chip on his shoulder of not winning that championship in college grew and grew. And if we're even going back to those corollaries, you know, Bird famously turned down the Hoosiers, said he wanted to play at Indiana State. Caitlin Clark famously turned down Notre Dame when everybody thought she was going to go there. When, you know, this from Dowling Catholic, when all the best students always go to Notre Dame, and had her silent commit. And she even said in that Wright Thompson profile, she wanted to love Notre Dame more than she did. And it wasn't perfect for her. And she found what was going to be perfect for her, which was not what everybody expected, but ended up being as good as she could have asked for, obviously. But that national championship didn't happen because, guys, again, basketball is a team sport, and South Carolina is the deepest, strongest team Iowa could have possibly faced. And really, I'm not sure that there is a formula for beating this version of Iowa basketball. Whatever that formula is, I'm not sure there's any way South Carolina could have been constructed better for that formula, right? We're talking about a generational talent in the middle who is so much taller than anybody that's in Iowa's rotation. You know, depth that really challenges Iowa both in the post and on the perimeter, right? Like Caitlin Clark was never going to win that game for herself and be the GOAT by herself for winning that, because that's not the way basketball works. But Caitlin will have that chip on her shoulder going into the WNBA, and it will make her a better pro for it. And, you know, those older pros who are already a little bit salty about the attention that she's bringing, they're going to be gunning for her too. And it's going to make Clark a more fierce competitor at the pro level. It's probably going to win her a few rings now that she's ready for the competition, for the adversity, and you know, the knowing that nobody is going to be letting her have anything at the next level. They're going to make her earn it. And once she starts earning it, and it's a matter of when, not if, look out to the rest of the league, because for as much as Caitlin has the Larry Bird in college corollaries, I think she's in for a Magic Johnson Showtime turn once she joins the Fever. Once she's on the court with 9 other WNBA players and making the plays that she wants to make, making the plays that appear in her head, but she knows that even players at a college level are not going to be able to finish for her. When she's tossing no looks to Eliot Boston, when she's tossing them to Kelsey Mitchell, right? Like when she's tossing them around WNBA defenders and knowing that there's no better competition for her to make foolish, guys, I think her fame is only going to hit the stratosphere from here. And she's going to be a proud Hawkeye while she does it, even though she's not wearing that Hawkeye uniform. So I think it's going to be great for Iowa, even if she's not in Iowa City anymore.
So I missed the last 2-3 minutes of the conversation. I had to step out of the room, but the two names that I wanted to bring up in terms of college basketball, and this might be my childhood talking because my eyes were the size of saucers watching Steph Curry at Davidson. And then I remember being in the Ida Grove Rec Center with my buddy Darian, and we were shooting shots from way deep and saying Jimmer. So those are we would have been like, if we were in 7th, 8th grade now, we'd be saying Caitlin. Like that, those are the only two names that I can think of that I was alive for. I can't reference Larry Bird or anything like that, but I do totally understand the sentiment. I mean, taking Indiana State to the championship against Magic Johnson, like what do you do with that? But like those two are the only
just to pop in real quick to prove your point about the Caitlin part. The game after they put the Caitlin 22 on the court, that little decal, it was during the state tournaments, and there was a boys team that was shooting around on the court after one of the Iowa women's game. And what were those kids doing but heaving from Caitlin Clark's spot? All of them like just taking turns, like trying to hit it. And I would say they hit maybe 5%. It was like it felt like a half court heave for all of them. And I guarantee you a lot of them came away from that thinking like, that's her shot. Like that is her money shot from there, like she's raising the bar for what great shooting looks like, period. And so all of this stuff about boys versus girls and this and that, it doesn't matter to hoopers. She is that generational role model as a shooter. Everybody who's putting on those shorts and sneakers, and the Bruce Lees, the Kobe's, the reverse Grinches, like she is the model for all of them. And it doesn't matter if it's boys or girls or this or that. Hooping is hooping, and you see this younger generation get that.
So with time running up here for us, I do want to talk a little bit about the future for Iowa women's basketball. And I guess before we get to that, we've got some questions, and we'll segue into this future conversation. We got some questions. This one is from Cat Coach on iowa.rivals.com on our premium board. If you want to be part of the podcast here, you can join us there at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe. If you're not a subscriber yet, if you are a subscriber, you can always drop questions to us on our premium board. So question was regarding the championship game, was Clark, there's a couple questions in order here. Was Clark being held on every possession, offensive possession rather? Can the women's game get more consistent reffing? Why do they call so many jump balls compared to the men? And I think this is a question for you, Adam, because you were there.
Yeah, well, I've always gotten my thoughts on refereeing, and I don't think that the officiating played any significant role in the outcome of the game. The stronger team won, and in terms of the physicality, there was probably a little bit of contact. I don't think Clark was being fouled on every possession. I mean, at some point, you have to just give credit to Raven Johnson for being a tenacious defender and saying, I'm throwing all my energy at that. If I miss my shots, I miss them. But South Carolina figured out a way, especially after that first quarter when guys, let's remember, Caitlin Clark dropped 18 points in the first quarter of that game. We hadn't even mentioned that part yet. She broke an NCAA tournament record for the most points in a quarter. She did it in the national championship against South Carolina, the undisputed number one, wire to wire. The only thing that they didn't do was start the season number one, and that was on the voters. That was not on South Carolina. Wire to wire, that was the best team in college basketball, and Caitlin Clark scored 18 points in the first 10 minutes against them. So they knew that they had to throw everything at Clark just to disrupt what she was doing. And Raven Johnson took that on herself and, did her job as best as you could, because once they started to disrupt those passing lanes for Clark, once they said, we're swiping at that ball, and when she got stripped clean as a sheet at half court, leading to that run out for that layup at the end of the half, that was a statement by that South Carolina defense that we're going to be doing this for 20 more minutes, and we're going to have fresher legs doing it. That was a uh-oh moment. And it turned out to be exactly that over the next 20 minutes. And so in terms of the refereeing, in terms of how to get it more consistent, there were some missed calls and there were some inconsistent calls, which is the more frustrating thing, because ultimately you want these players to understand ahead of time and to be able to trust what is going to be a foul and what isn't going to be a foul. And when that starts to waver and get inconsistent, it can have an effect on how the game is being played, the flow of it, and this and that. So yeah, you do want it to get a little bit better. I've been pretty consistent on this thing, and I think that this is going to require sort of a transformational change in the way the games are being refereed, because ultimately there's a disconnect between what the referees have available to them and what fans have available to them. And TV, I think, is part of the problem for referees, and video review is part of the problem for referees too, because fans get to see what the right call is 15 seconds after the fact in ways that and that's a luxury that the referees who are just running on the up and down the court and who have to make that call like that and don't really get take backsies unless the other two referees say no, we got this, it's good. But by and large, you have to make that call in that moment on that floor, and you have to be right. And if you don't get it right, you're degrading the credibility of refereeing, and all these fans who think, well, the fix is in. Halen's Racer is my favorite maxim for all of these, and it says simply, never ascribe to malice that can which be adequately explained by incompetence. Like, I'm not sure how fans see this and think the referees are good enough at their job to throw games for one team or another. that is like saying, well, I could dunk if I could, but I'm throwing the game from the other team. Like, no, I can't dunk. Like, so I think the solution is that TV and instant replay has to be a more integral part of the calls to begin with. And some of that is the fact that, I think fans have to acknowledge that just because TV sees what the right call is going to be 15 seconds later on instant, replay, slow-mo from angles that are from like the baseline cameras and this and that, one, there has to be a recognition that referees don't have access to all of that. And two, this is the Big Ten. This is a nationwide made-for-TV conference at this point. So if you guys are selling TV contracts for 8 figures, 9 figures, if you're making all that money off of the TV setups being at these games, use those to make your refereeing better. And I'm not talking about the replay rules that are in now where like you stop the game for 5 minutes so everybody can pour around, the referees on the court can pour around a TV that's the size of this laptop screen that I'm staring at now. I'm talking about have another referee, like one who's not running up and down the court, who is looking at the same feeds that everybody else has, and who's able to make these determinations from an official standpoint, and not with somebody from the conference in their ear. A referee who's only looking at these TV angles and who can make these calls and fix these calls in a quick way, in something that is going to be consistent with the viewing experience that fans have. If you have that, I think you restore credibility to the referees. You're taking some of these calls off of the hands and these these split-second judgment things out of the hands of these officials who are not in as good position to make these calls as, say, the people in the truck 15 seconds later. And I think you can, at the very least, get refereeing back to a point where it's sustainable and fans understand, some of the limitations that they've got and how the conference is addressing them. It feels like a 21st century solution to a 21st century problem, which is our eyes lie a little bit. And basketball players have skills at like fooling referees a little bit. You go back to that moving screen that UConn and Aaliyah Edwards got called for with 4 seconds left. Gabby, tossing her hair a little bit helped get that call. It was the right call. But if Gabby doesn't throw it, help sell it with that little bit of the head, twitch and making her ponytail fly a little bit more, does that get the call? I guess we'll never know. But that's part of basketball too. That is a basketball skill, and so it doesn't call the credibility of Gabby or the call into question. That's not that. But you start to understand why a player like Caitlin Clark might fall when she gets contact that she deems a foul. You start to understand why soccer players, quote, flop. It's because part of it's selling it to referees who are just right there in the moment and who are at the, often they are reacting to the effect of the contact as much as the contact itself, because there's only so much they can do on that front. So yeah, in terms of getting better refereeing, I think obviously you want to bring the pay up. I don't think it's a matter of not enough accountability. So sorry to fans who spend the entire game getting mad at referees, and there's a few of them. Most of them live in Hilton Coliseum, but it's a nationwide thing where it's not one fan base that's always mad at the referees. But I really do think that there needs to be a transformational change in the way that refereeing is done in this TV era. Otherwise, and like, gosh, at the Final Four, guys, they're running PSAs about the shortage impending in referees in college sports. That there's a what did they say? The retirement rate is 4 times the amount of referees that are coming in. So this is all going to get worse. So you have to attract more referees to begin with, and I think pay is part of that, but also you have to give them a position to succeed. I don't think in this TV and instant replay era, I don't think referees are in position to succeed, and I think it erodes the credibility of them, and by extension, the sport, the conference. So they need to be put in position to succeed, and their calls do need to be a little bit better too. But guys, once you're running up and down that court, and once you're courtside and you see how quick this action is and how split second, and you only get that one shot, but 20 times a game to get that call perfect, you see that calling a perfect game is almost as rare as throwing a perfect game in baseball. So that is my longer answer to that question. Ross, do you have anything to add about refereeing?
No, I mean, it's inconsistent. It's always been inconsistent. I think you laid out some good ideas for how to improve that, the overall approach to refereeing, which does need a rethink beyond, the way it's been done. I mean, the way they do refereeing now is essentially the way they did it 80 years ago. So,
yeah,
there needs to be some rethinking of aspects of that. And until that happens, until they pay officials more and attract, more capable individuals, we're going to get inconsistent officiating. And that's just an unfortunate reality, I think.
Okay, on to the future of Iowa women's basketball, and we'll hit this quickly, preferably in the next 5-ish minutes, best we can. Of course, we'll talk more about the future of Iowa women's basketball when the time comes. But we've got a question from Denti Nanier, who's asking, are the Iowa women on any tall recruits? Ava Hayden, namely, I know. And then to combine that quickly with Waterloo Chaz, who's asking, what does Iowa's NIL group and fans need to do to allow Bluder and company to capitalize off these 2 Final Fours? Or was this the apex of Iowa women's basketball? And I think you've already answered that, Adam. But as the guy who covers, along with Braden, covers Iowa women's basketball and recruiting, what are your thoughts on those 2 questions? Do they coincide?
Yeah, I think there is something to both of those questions. I think we've already answered that this is not the apex of Iowa basketball, or at the very least, if it is, then that will be because of problems unseen. But right now, Iowa basketball is being built to be as sustainable as South Carolina basketball. The formula is finding its way into place. Now, it will take time because a lot of this depends on 2024, 2025. I almost said 1924. No. But it's going to rely on those 25, 26 recruiting classes, and those are still finding their way into place. In terms of the taller recruits, though, you don't really see Iowa in on those big 6-7 posts as yet. Their 2024 class, Hayden, again, has been mentioned, but other than that, it's Guyton at 5'8", it's 11 at 5'8", Malagney, Stremlow is 5'8", I believe, and Malagney is 6'0". And when you look at the 25 and 26 classes, again, those are going to be backcourt heavy, sort of taller prospects too. But even Addison Bjorn, who is sort of the unicorn, the unicorn, if you will, of the 26 class, she's got guard skills at 6'2", which is tall and good, and you want that. You want somebody who can sort of be the Tracy McGrady of your backcourt of the future. But again, that's not how you solve a 6'7" problem. So maybe it's a transfer portal decision. Maybe it is who's the recruit coming up that maybe hasn't gotten that attention quite yet. But yeah, especially if Iowa keeps bumping into the height problem. And it was most certainly a problem this year. You sort of look at this and say, all right, how is Iowa attacking these players who sort of tower over, your smaller posts, your more quicker posts, and how do you neutralize that advantage if you're not going to be able to rebound with them? Because again, like you said, 51-29 on the glass, and I was a little bit shocked to hear that Iowa hadn't gotten doubled up rebounding. It was close, but they kept it within 50%, and that is really no way to win a national championship. And so there does have to be some way to address that, whether that's going to be in the portal, although, where the scholarship's going to come from. Is Iowa going to retain everybody from this class who is supposed to be returning? Because that is in and of itself an open question. There are probably going to be some tough discussions about what roles are going to look like, especially now that these higher levels of talent are coming in these recruiting classes. I mean, I was bringing in 4 top 100 recruits, and they're all good. They're all good. Is anybody in this 24 class going to step into that, like Caitlin Clark, put the entire team on me role? I'm not so sure about that, especially as a freshman. You don't look at any of them and say, oh, all right, well, you want this player, taking 20 shots a game as a true freshman. You don't see that. And so Iowa fans expecting this team to just reload and head back to the next Final Four. I got a little bit of bad news on that front. They're going to need a lot more luck than they got this year, to say the least. And they'll need some more luck than they got even in the 23 Final Four. But the staff knows. They know. And so the nice thing is, in the transfer portal, somebody who doesn't like the role that is setting up in front of them for the next few years at Iowa, they've got their way out. And somebody who sees the obvious need, the way that Tina Pow saw the obvious need for her skills on South Carolina, if there's some 6'7" woman out there who, thinks that she's got something to add to this team, and who can add that dimension of like, all right, now we can bang with anybody, and on top of that, who's able to run with the way that Iowa is going to want to run, it's there. Like, the opportunity is sitting there and waiting. And, the coaches this year did a great job of highlighting what they did have as opposed to what they didn't have. But what they did have was a lot of seniors coming back, a lot of talent, experience, and familiarity with each other coming back. All of that is graduating now. And so this is the year where you do kind of have to look at what you don't have. And the recruits are going to help the back court. Hayden's going to help the front court. They need more help in the front court. They need more help at point guard this year. So they'll be better on that front. They do need to figure out how they're going to solve the 6-7 problem. I don't see it on their roster right now for this coming season, or really in the recruits that they've got yet. They've got to figure it out.
And regarding NIL, I'm imagining, that's different with the rest. Well, I know that's different as opposed to what it was like this year regarding Caitlin, because you don't have Caitlin Clark coming back. Is this a situation where folks need to decide and start donating to Swarm? Is it influence of local businesses? Like, what do you see here?
Yeah, you already see the local businesses sort of chip in, and like there's Taco Bell ads that I see on Instagram where it's and they're terribly contrived, and I mean that in the best, like local ads should be terribly contrived. It's got all that like I'm walking into the restaurant with my jersey on, you would see baseball players do in the 90s, right? Like, hi, I'm slugger Tony Gwynn, and when I want a used car, blah blah blah. Like, it's that sort of level. And so it's good to see that opportunity opening up for these players as women's basketball players. And one thing that another national writer had sort of pointed out during the Final Four is the effectiveness of NIL, especially for women's athletes, is that they are reaching Generation Z in a way that brands just can't. They are the in with a generation who's very distrustful of corporations, of faceless like logos and this and that. These athletes are the face and the entry point for that generation of an NIL standpoint, because it proves the value of female athletes. It proves that they are not the detriment to profitability that everybody says they are. So these NIL opportunities will keep popping up, and it's not, Caitlin was not the if anything, she was just breaking the model that really didn't work, of like, she only broke the model of don't pay female athletes. But you don't have to be as good as Caitlin Clark to be an asset and to be valuable and to be notable, really, to earn that NIL money. Now, there might have to be some discussions with the Swarm in terms of making those women's basketball specific donations more accessible, especially for smaller donors. And, you know, Iowa built this fame on the backs of a lot of season ticket holders who were happy to buy those season tickets because they were a lot cheaper than men's. And so if you start to price them out, if you start to sort of disregard them or think of them as, you know, sort of like not integral to the success and the fame of Iowa women's basketball, and if you keep putting the minimum payment that you've got to have to direct all of your Swarm donations to women's basketball, because there you have to hit a certain level. And I've had donors say, like, boy, I really wish they would bring that floor down, because people don't typically, historically, show their support for women's basketball with a ton of money. The fame has been because it has been accessible, because it has been family friendly, because you can bring your 3 kids to a game, or, you know, retirees can't afford season tickets. So there does need to be an acknowledgement of what the fan base looks like, and to meet them where they are financially. And typically women's basketball has done a good job of that. As that fame rises, there has to be some way for fans with that more limited budget to keep showing their support for women's basketball in general. So yeah, you will see these NIL opportunities continue to flourish and thrive for women's basketball, both from local businesses, from Swarm, from the collective, and all these different ways. And for the next superstar that comes in, you know, like an Addie Deal, I think she will have access to national sponsorship opportunities and sort of make her own way, because again, that trail has been blazed now by Caitlin Clark. We now know what that model looks like, and you know, Caitlin is not the only women's basketball player who's going to be, you know, represented by agents. So we start to see that come together, come to fruition, and that will continue to grow. But there also does need to be an acknowledgement by the Swarm, by NIL in general, that like support for women's basketball in particular needs to be accessible as possible. So that's the answer to that question, as long as tortuous as that was.
And we'll wrap it up there. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of Hotcast to honor the women after a national title run and Caitlin Clark wrapping up her career as an Iowa Hawkeye. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of Hotcast, brought to you by Iowa.Rivals.com. If you're not a subscriber yet, wherever you're listening, particularly on YouTube, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Drop a like, drop a comment. What'd you think about the women's title run and everything that has ensued in the last few weeks? If you're not a premium subscriber on Iowa.Rivals.com, you can do that today at Iowa.Rivals.com/subscribe to join us. Transfer portal is going to be something that we are going to be watching closely. College football and spring football is wrapping up here soon. Of course, we're going to be all over football recruitment. basketball as well. I'm headed off to a 3SSB tournament in Omaha this week, so that'll all be premium content as well. Don't forget as well, subscribe, leave a rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. That way you don't miss an episode. And of course, leaving that rate and review helps us out, and it does make us very happy. I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder, managing editor of the site, and Adam Jacoby, our publisher. For now, we will see you next time.